how do we, don't we need a certain amount of at least experiential privilege in order to be able to raise certain questions? And that's probably true. Plato in the Republic describes this moment as a way of turning. So there is really no um, particular way in which you can um, identify, isolate, or abstract the moment in which you turn to these questions. And the allegory of the cave, that's what he's trying to explain when he says like the one turns. All of a sudden you turn, that you realize everything that is in front of you is an appearance, is an illusion. um, that moment of recognition he really doesn't explain. Like somebody else comes and turns other people around, that you can understand, maybe that somebody inspires you, somebody gives you a perspective in life, etc. But how do you get that first moment? How is it that the first person does that? That's really sort of one of the mysteries of life. Like, why do some people raise certain questions? Sometimes some people don't. Why do some people study philosophy? Why some people don't? I mean, you try to explain your experience and you tell other people, this is what I did, that's why I did that, blah, blah. But it really doesn't resonate until it resonates. And you never know. That cannot be brought about. So I always have this issue like, next week I'm going to do this meet your major, love your major thing that we do in order to explain philosophy major. But it's a kind of futile activity to a certain extent, because you need to turn to it somehow. And I think one moment, for Nietzsche at least, which I will say nevertheless, is on page 48. That's something that we discussed last time. What is your existence worth? And if it is worthless, why are you here? That's a sort of fundamental encounter with your own being, with your own existence, that no other person can actually quite teach you. Uh, your guilt, I see. I love this passage. I don't know why. I know Isaac maybe wouldn't like it because it comes right after that uh, melancholic phase. Um, your guilt, I see, causes you tarry in your existence. With your death, you have to expiate it. Look how your earth is withering, how your seas are diminishing and drying up. The seashell on the mountaintop can show you how much has dried up already. I mean, it's almost poetic, right? Even now, fire is destroying your world. Someday it will go up in fumes and smoke. This is his Heraclitean, like. But ever and anew, another such world of ephemerality will construct itself. Who is there that could redeem you from the curse of coming to be? A mensch, a person, like, I don't know, it's translated as a man. I find that problematic. So, person who poses such questions such as these, whose thinking in its upward flight kept breaking all empirical ropes, catching instead at superlunary ones, such a man very likely does not welcome an ordinary mode of living. And moreover, other people don't welcome that person either. So whenever you sort of raise questions that are fundamental and existential in life, more often than not, you will be like, oh, why are you raising these questions? And don't you have but better things to do? Why don't you just get on the dirt and deal with us with all the aspects of life, which seems to be a fair criticism sometimes. But what are most people doing? Like, is it okay to be engaged in other appearances in life? Like, can you build a career of being a gossip columnist? Is it okay that you are really doing an honorable job if you are sort of living off of other people? Uh, is it okay to be like building a platform in which you are exploiting people and making billions of dollars? It is a good way of living. So these are the kinds of questions that I think at that point, like, well, I don't know whether it is experience, but some kind of attitude towards life that leads you to raise those questions for Nietzsche. So I don't know whether that even addresses your question, Charlie, but that's Nietzsche's take.
A little bit. I think I'm just incredibly frustrated with this topic in general. But yeah.
Incredibly frustrated. How should I interpret that? Like,
Not that, not like I don't enjoy the discussions. I think I just have a lot. I'm just thinking and trying to digest a little bit and trying to understand where it's coming from and why it is in the human context, because it's almost explicitly in terms of humans. It's a very anthropocentric idea, which is like, I mean, philosophy is for, I mean, this, okay, not philosophy is, but this philosophy seems to be. And I'm
what
trying,
anthropocentric,
like, focused around humans, focused around the human experience.
what doesn't focus on human experience?
Nature, the natural universe.
You think
Also AI.
You think that don't so that concentrate on human existence, nature, and AI?
Wait, the universe? I don't think the universe like I don't think it cares about humans. We exist in it, but so do so many other things.
Well, aren't you saying that from a human perspective? I mean, isn't that the negation of our obsession with ourselves?
I've actually transcended human perspective.
Okay, then it's cool. But when I last felt incredibly frustrated, that always happens in the context of people you love, to me. Like, I don't get incredibly frustrated about things that concern, like, people that I don't care about. But I think, like, when you said incredibly frustrated, I thought, like, my daughter makes me incredibly frustrated because I love her, and otherwise nobody would make me incredibly frustrated. So my conclusion is that you actually love philosophy, but you don't recognize that.
No, I admit that I do love philosophy because it's making me think in ways that I don't usually, but in doing so it requires more intense thought. And I'm also a human who likes to think that they're in control of their reality.
You just said you transcended human. I'm sorry, did I miss something?
No, I went back to like
Okay.
just like the
Thank
normal one that doesn't transcend.
Okay, good. I mean, I'm happy that you're among us now. So that's cool. I appreciate that. I mean, if you are going to be incredibly frustrated, it's always good to be incredibly frustrated with other people. Like, imagine like somebody was just your president, you would probably couldn't carry on. So misery always what requires or loves company. So I'm just trying to bring you into my own misery. So that's why I'm gonna advertise philosophy to everybody. Okay, let's move on. Anybody else wants to jump to another part of the text?
I had a passage that I just thought was like very, very dramatic in a way that amused me, and also did a good job of illuminating like Parmenides' thought. But
go ahead.
On page 80, at just before section 11, the passage right before section 11, which says, a spider at least wants blood from its victims. The Parmenidean philosopher hates most of all the blood of his victims, the blood of the empirical reality which was sacrificed and shed by him.
And
I read that and I was like, but I don't know. Like it's I think yeah, a really illuminating passage because like it encapsulates this sort of, at least this hatred of sense perception that Nietzsche characterizes Parmenides as having. Like, and I don't know if I actually read this when we were reading like the actual passages from the verse of Parmenides in Curd, but
there was a spider, right? There was an image of spider. Am I?
Maybe, but what I'm saying is like Nietzsche is arguing throughout, I think, sections like 10 and 11 that like Parmenides has this like deep hatred for all sensed reality, and like, well, I certainly understand that he didn't think that it existed. I didn't necessarily read originally in his like direct like reading his poems, like I didn't read in that hatred as much, so I guess I was just curious, like where
that's
Nietzsche was getting that.
No, that's a good point. Why did I think this now? Maybe I'm confusing it with a moment in Nietzsche's Eternal Return of the Same, when he says this spider, etc. But
Does Nietzsche just love spiders?
Nietzsche has a interesting relationship to spiders. Yes, in the Das Spoke Zarathustra, one of his later texts, when he's talking about his main thought of the eternal return of the same, and he says like, this moment as you live it, this spider too. So I don't know whether I can find it, but I'm pretty sure that he refers to spider in that eternal return too. So maybe he has Parmenides in mind. When I read this part now, I realize, but I can't find the spider. Maybe I just totally dreamed it in Parmenides. So yeah, I probably did. There were chariot and horses, but no spider. So what does it mean not to want the blood of, like what this passage, like, I know I'm biased, but you know what this passage made me think of? Like, contemporary scientists are Parmenides. They are sort of like suck all the life out of the world and explain it in terms of cold formulas and mass, motion, etc., and through calculation. And then we lament the fact that how are we reduced to just numbers? It's like, yeah, we have been reducing everything to numbers for the last 400 years. Why is it surprising that we are numbers now? That's how we think, that's how we operate. And yes, of course, as an individual, you will be sacrificed. So like one thing that I loved about this COVID debate is like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
What makes a formula cold? There are so many beautiful formulas that describe reality.
It's a Parmenidean beauty. It is beauty. It's but like, and I agree with you. I'm not completely like, when I love to hate or hate to love science, because I go read statistics and it gives me enormous pleasure when I look at I go to Johns Hopkins site or the Worldometer, etc. And it's like COVID, like 3% of the closed cases ended in death. 97% didn't. That gives me a cold comfort. But that juxtaposed to one person on, usually the only thing that I do is Facebook, when one person in Facebook says that my immediate someone that I know died. Therefore, we should do all these policies. And then you go, yeah, I understand that. I don't mean to be cold like Parmenides, but 97% of people didn't succumb to that fate. So maybe we should just look at this as numbers. And it is comforting, because it's not comforting to look at one person's pain and to live that, and it's not comforting to live it. But if you look at this from this abstract perspective, yeah, you are like, I got a surgery one day, like 12 years ago, and they said, like, you have a 5% chance of dying. And I said, well, I had that surgery, so you expose yourself to 5% of dying. Now, of course, with COVID, there are other variables, but also I was relatively healthy when I had the surgery. So, you know, maybe it wasn't 5%, maybe it was 4%, but that number gives me comfort. If they had said 25%, they're like, oh, okay, that's a little more. But if somebody were to come, which they did, it's like, oh, my cousin had this surgery and he died. And I go, shut up. That's not what I really want to hear. I want to hear this cold numbers. I don't know how you feel about this. Yeah, so I would really recommend, like, in the midst of all, like, oh, everything is terrible, all these anecdotes, etc. And I go and look at the numbers. And they might be wrong, they might be skewed and all that, but it gives me comfort.
Is a 3% death rate really comforting? That feels very high. Like, that's a
From
lot of
all the
people.
people who actually got it, yeah, I'm cool with that. I mean, it's a disease, it's a pandemic. We changed our lives. Given the drama associated with it, 3% is comforting to me, yes. I mean, of course, it's a matter of interpretation, I suppose, but imagine it was 10. And it is
That
dropping.
would also be bad. I think they're both bad.
But there's also this beauty. Like when it first started, it was 19%. And then dropped to 18, 17, all the way to 3. So of all the closed cases that was statistically lumped together, the death was 81. I mean, the survival was 81 and death was 19. So yes, I am very happy that it dropped to 3. Because there are more hospitals, more beds. They probably now know what they are doing a little bit better than they did at the beginning. So there is a kind of experience that, like, okay, we gave that to people, didn't work, maybe we should do this and all that kind of stuff. So yes, it dropped to 3%, and I think it's quite an achievement regardless. So because we always look at the terrible, dramatic numbers, which is true, I mean, I'm not minimizing it, but the death rate dropping from 19 to 3, to me is like, it's good. But somebody says, oh, you can't say that, my cousin died. And I go, that's just like the problem in terms of whatever called scientific, rational discourse I might have. I'm not showing enough empathy to that person. And it's like, well, yes, I mean, you can do both. So you can be both Heraclitean and Parmenidean. Okay, those are metaphors, of course. But stay away. Well, I mean, also, like, I have also a very ambiguous relationship to spiders too. So, what do
How
you think?
with spiders?
What's that?
How is your relationship with spiders ambiguous?
Well, I don't know whether I like them or don't like them. That's the ambiguity. I mean, I'm fascinated by the creature, but I don't really want it too close to me. And is there anybody who is Muslim here? So the Prophet Muhammad was hiding in a cave from his enemies, and a spider came and immediately produced a web to give the impression that that cave was not entered for a long time. And the legend is that the spider saved his life, which, depending on my attitude towards my own religion, I love or hate spiders. So. That's also, I think, I mean, it has a symbolic significance in a number of stories. So that's why, like I like horses regardless, or I mean, unless they are really mean, but I haven't really seen it. But like certain animals are like, you have to love them. But I grew up in Turkey in the 70s. I don't like cockroaches. My relationship is not ambiguous. It's pretty straightforward. But they are animals too. So but that was a silly point. Anyway, so any other section? Who didn't talk about any section that they introduced? Kit, did you? Since you're hiding your head.
I didn't.
You're hiding, yes.
But I have mine on page 52. The first paragraph.
This is Heraclitus.
Yeah. Did you see that paragraph?
What's that?
Did you see that paragraph on the first one of 52?
Yes.
Yeah, I just see it like it's kind of related to the Buddhism thing called Anatman. Like there's no unchanging self.
Yeah, Heraclitus proclaimed, this actually starts on page 51. I see
Yeah.
nothing other than becoming. This is what Kate brought up and Charlie brought up in terms of the river. Was that you? Yeah, I see nothing becoming. Be not deceived. It is the fault of your myopia, not of the nature of things, if you believe you see land somewhere in the ocean of coming to be and passing away. So of course, land represents something permanent, unchanging, solid that you can stand on, whereas coming to be is the sea that is constantly changing. You use names for things as though they rigidly, persistently endured. Yet even the stream into which you step a second time is not the one you stepped into before. So that when I first read that I started thinking about this literally, like we give names to rivers. And I don't know why it is always the same river. And giving the name sort of gives us the illusion that there is a permanence there. Oh, Mississippi has always been there for centuries, but it's not the same thing. So that's Heraclitus's point, that you give names to yourself, and I'm always Charlie, I'm always Kate, I'm that. Then that gives the impression that there is an, as you said, personal identity, that you are always talking about the same person. That's a good observation, that it actually also speaks about personal identity too. Naming is a powerful tool that imposes permanence into the world. Yes, Isaac.
I found the idea of naming and the importance of that to be really interesting. On page 82 and 83, it says, we cannot indeed find any reality whatever, which is, that word is like cut out, something strictly in accordance with these propositions. I may say of a tree that it is in distinction to things which are not trees. I may say it is coming to be in distinction to itself, seen at a different time. I may even say it is not, for example, and it is not yet a tree. When I'm looking at a shrub, words are but symbols for the relations of things to one another and to us. But this was kind of confusing to me.
The word is constructed, yes.
Yeah, but it was kind of like, if Parmenides' whole idea is like turning away from all sense perception. It seems like to cast out words as this abstract way of viewing the world is almost like antithetical to that.
Well, why is that antithetical? I think that the word gives you the stability that turns you away from the empirical changes.
But he's trying to get rid of words, or right? Words are but symbols, so we should use something else.
Hmm. Well, that's Nietzsche's retort against Parmenides, is it not? I don't know. How do you read it?
I'm gonna go back and read through it one more time, honestly.
Okay, start from the as soon as we seek the content. Yeah.
All right. As soon as we seek the content of the logical truth of the paired propositions, what is, what is not, we cannot indeed find any reality whatever, which is constrained strictly in constructed. Okay. Strictly in accordance with those propositions. I may say of a tree that it is in distinction to things which are not trees. I may say it is coming to be in distinction to itself seen at a different time. I may even say it is not, as for example, it is not yet a tree when I'm looking at a shrub. Words are but symbols for the relations of things to one another and to us. Nowhere do they touch upon absolute truth.
So do you, I mean, is this, you think that Parmenides' view, or is it Nietzsche's objection to Parmenides? Olivia and then Charlie, I think you had something.
I think this is Parmenides' view. Like, the way I interpret this is it's saying that in Parmenides' reality, all things either are or are not, and all things that humans perceive kind of walk this weird line between them, meaning that they don't exist, and our words, the objects they describe, are not part of either this, like, eternal existent reality or non-existence, which can't even be probed or described. Like, that's how I read this. I don't read this as a rebuke of Parmenides. I think that this is a way of framing his thought.
Okay. Anybody else? Charlie, did you have something, or did I miss? So do we make the world more permanent or less permanent when we use names?
More permanent, like you say, like having a name for a river, even though it's changing.
But that would be then like, why is Parmenides saying the words are not cool? They don't make permanent enough or something? Yeah, bless it. Sorry.
I think it's Nietzsche's rebuke on like Parmenides' view, because like it feels like Nietzsche is saying that like he's kind of like looking at it from like a Heraclitean point of view in terms of like words, like the last statement says, words are but symbols for the relations of things to one another and to us. No way do they touch upon absolute truth. Like it's like you can't bring permanence into the world. Like everything's constantly changing, and so like words do not like fully encompass how everything is constantly changing. That's like how I understood it.
Yeah, I mean, forget about like how we are reading it, etc. But let's. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Olivia.
I guess I thought that what Parmenides was saying was that like everything is constantly changing, but the everything that is constantly changing is all that humans perceive, which is entirely separate from everything that actually is, which is not constantly changing. Which is why I don't read this as a rebuke, because it is consistent with that. But I may be totally wrong.
I mean, you're right. The question in front of us is like, forget about Parmenides and Heraclitus, just for us to think, like when you have a name, like when you say this is a tree, that label, doesn't that bring us closer to the permanence as a word, even though our perception of the tree constantly changes? As you are right, Parmenides sees that in human beings, but that's not real. What is real is the name tree. So that provides a kind of permanence. So because he calls on to say, because Parmenides uses words, and the words that he uses is being. So above all, the word being designates only the most general relationship which connects all things, as does the word non-being. But if the existence of things themselves cannot be proved, surely the interrelationship of things, their so-called being or non-being, will advance us to a step toward the land of truth. Through words and concepts, we shall never reach beyond the wall of relations to some sort of fabulous primal ground of things. Now, maybe this is what Parmenides thinks, or maybe Nietzsche attributes to Parmenides that we are going to reach the permanence with concepts. Even in the pure forms of sense and understanding in space and time and causality, we gain nothing that resembles an eternal verity. So what are you looking for, Parmenides? We do not reach eternal verity at all. So that would be the rebuke. It is absolutely impossible for a subject to see or have insight into something while leaving itself out of the picture, so impossible that knowing and being are the most opposite of all spheres. And if Parmenides could permit himself, in the uninformed naivety of his time, so far as critique of the intellect is concerned, to derive absolute being from a forever subjective concept today after Kant, it is certainly reckless ignorance to attempt it. So again, I'm not sure. I mean, I agree, I don't know, with both Olivia and Blessed. So it might be a rebuke, it might not be. I don't know Nietzsche's intention, but I'm still under the impression that at least words give us relative stability. When I say, look at this is tree in front of my window, and it's a complete, I mean, the colors has changed, the body has changed, the branches broke, etc. But I keep saying that it's the same tree, and it gives me the idea of permanence. But maybe words don't function like that. Maybe words just like constantly evolving and don't have any permanence that Parmenides was looking for. So maybe that is a permanence that cannot even be expressed in language, in words, because as soon as you introduce the word, then you are making it changing like what human beings perceive. So that would support Olivia's interpretation. I guess you have to think it for yourself. Like, you need to think it for yourself. I'm not looking for I am, but not necessarily a correct interpretation of the text. You can still say that Nietzsche seems to be a little off here. That's perfectly fine. So when was this published? So it's around 1873. So how old is he? He's not even 40. So actually not even 20, 30. He wrote this when he was 29. So you have a few years left. So it's way too late for me. Yeah, so I mean, it's okay to say like, oh, Nietzsche here. I don't think he gives a compelling interpretation of Parmenides. Although you should always be careful while disagreeing with supreme philosophers. I mean, that's always a issue. Like, I used to have students in my introductory classes, and it's like, I think Plato is wrong, which is, sure, you are free to think that, but maybe you should frame it in a little bit more modest way. I think we really lost the sense of modesty in the modern world, because if you are modest, then you are interpreted as you don't have enough confidence in yourself, which you should never have. You should always have enough confidence in yourself for some reason. That's what psychologists tell us. It's like, I think there's also a social value in modesty. Like, you know, I mean, people have been reading and interpreting this person for better or for worse for 2,500 years. And I learned how to read 15 years ago. So maybe I should have a little bit of perspective. So I don't know. Am I like being too traditionalist?
I don't know. I just think that sometimes, I mean, yeah, there's a difference between like being cocky about it and being honest about it. But I feel like sometimes the modesty can kind of ruin the integrity of the argument. Like if I truly believe something, does softening my own perspective on a reading really benefit anyone, myself or others around me included?
It might. It might. It might not. Depends on the argument.
Yeah, it is very argument or like context dependent,
but you
I
don't
mean,
open up a paper saying Plato is wrong, right? That's, you know, that doesn't advance the argument.
I mean, at this point, can you even, is it possible to even argue that someone as influential on the society in which you live in so much is wrong? Like, is that even a debate that you can have anymore?
Well, I can see one particular person who has a lot of influence on society and is that wrong, sure.
But I'm saying like, not society now, but like the foundations of society as we know it.
Sure. I mean, when we even talk about Plato, we are not really talking about Plato, the person. There's an industry, there is a tradition of reading Plato, interpreting Plato, publishing Plato, translating Plato. So it would be sort of, to say that Plato is wrong is problematic, not because you think that he is wrong, but you presume that you understand what he's saying because you actually identified what is Plato, who is not. You can say like, this interpretation of Plato is misleading. Sure, I go along with that. But that is an interpretation of Plato. I don't know the person. I don't know the man. I've never met him. I never spoke to him. I cannot really speak like Plato, right? So it's just a matter of your attitude. So when I say modesty, like to be more sensible in formulating your argument. Not that you have to agree with him because he's influential, like certainly not. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Yes, Nancy, do you have something?
Yeah, I just also in terms of Charlie's question, I think we kind of, even though maybe they were geniuses and all that, we have to argue against them because most of these old philosophers like thought women were inferior and agreed with slavery.
Sure. That they had a very different conception of slavery though, right? You also have to, I mean, it wasn't like you were a slave from birth as a predicament. Slaves were the ones sometimes who lost the war. So you have to come and work for me if I beat you. So, and then the person who was a slave could be the non-slave and vice versa, etc. It was more sort of upward mobility in their understanding of slavery, and everybody could be not like a 19th century, 17th century, 17th, 18th century racial slavery.
But today we'd still say that that kind of slavery was wrong as well.
Well, of course.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Not all wrongs are created equal, but yes, they're all wrong. That's also a very important distinction. Like, people do horrible things, but they are not all doing the same thing. They are doing different horrible things. And there are varying degrees of horribleness. And it's okay to differentiate them. That doesn't mean you are excusing one horrible thing. You are just saying one horrible thing is more horrible than the other. And we accept that in our, justice system too, right? We even sort of numerical attribution to crimes. Like, this is 5 years, this is 10 years, this is 15 years, this is for life. So yeah, we differentiate them. And I mean, you shouldn't take comfort that you only get 5 years as opposed to 25, but still, you don't. And yes, almost all philosophers up until 20th century, even beyond, are racist, but they are not racist in the same way. They are all sexist, but they are not all sexist in the same way. Some of them are women, they are also sexist too, so you never know.
Zizek is inventing new and innovative ways to be sexist.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm mostly concerned nowadays of sexism of people who claim not to be sexist, and racism of people who are claiming not to be racist. But all of a sudden, everybody got quiet. It's okay to talk about Parmenides and Heraclitus, but not like. Yes, Charlie, be very careful what you say next. Yes.
I just want to say, I think it's interesting how now racism is very much associated with acts of commission, but racist acts of omission. You can get away with a lot of racist acts of omission and not be considered a racist.
Maybe not anymore, not as much as it used to. But, yeah.
Like, I mean, as far as being privileged enough that you have a platform and not using it in any way, even though you can, isn't that considered an act of omission?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, nowadays there is a whole industry of anti-racist workshops, etc. That I get an email every day about an anti-racist workshop, which is ironically always run by white people, which sort of always makes me pause and it's like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? Yeah, what's going on here? But
yeah, there's definitely a lot of hypocrisy going on, I think, with all that stuff. I remember, I think, like in fairly early March, before we all got sent home, coronavirus was just getting a bit out of hand, bit by bit. But
I mean, I could consistently argue, and I will try to argue in the course next semester, that the roots of racial thinking or the possibility of racism is already prepared in ancient Greece for Western philosophical thinking. But also there is a kind of myopia, if you like, about how we approach this question, assuming that we even know what we are talking about. I think to me, that's the most fundamental issue. Like everybody uses the term, engages with it, and knows as if they know what you're talking about. That fascinates me the most. Like, oh, I know what racism is. I'm not one, but I know what it is. And I think part of the issue is like, we are much more concerned about its social label, that it doesn't touch us, than actually understanding the problem. So, you know, when you ask like, when did the concept of race come from? When did it appear? And it's like, oh, people have been racist for millennia. No, you're just like not even educating yourself about the history of the concept. So that's a tough one. Yeah, I don't know how I can any longer live in the United States, to be honest. So, it's getting harder and harder.